Welcome to RICO 12. My name is Justin, and I am a child of an all-powerful and all-loving God and a recovering addict, and am blessed to be the host of this meeting and podcast. RICO 12 is an organization with the mission of learning and sharing the similarities of addictions of all kinds and gaining and sharing tools and hope from others who are walking a similar path. We come together from all places, faiths, and backgrounds to gain tools and hope from others who are on this path. Speakers from our past meetings have represented so many fellowships, addictions, and afflictions, and we look forward to continuing to add to the diversity of speakers and backgrounds. Today's speaker for the 165th meeting is Rhyll C., who will be speaking on Detaching with Love. Rhyll is a first-time RICO 12 speaker, and I'm super excited to hear from her. She's someone who I've spoken with before and has a great story. Excited about that. First, for some business. The RICO 12 family of recovery resources continues to grow and have more and more resources for the addict and the loved ones of those addicted. We also have RICO 12 Shares, which I talked about a little bit before the meeting. It's an open meeting for anybody to listen to shares, to record shares, and just gain experience, strength, and hope from anybody, anywhere. We also have a meeting called the First 164, which meets on Zoom every Friday at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, and I'll put the links and information on that in the chat and the show notes, and a couple of other super exciting projects that are quickly approaching in July. Your donations and subscriptions are making this all possible, as there are costs to build and maintain all of them. On that note, RICO 12 is a self-supporting service, and we appreciate your help in keeping us working our Step 12 in this manner. We gratefully accept one-time contributions through PayPal and Venmo through the links in the chat and show notes that'll be there. We also offer a monthly subscription program called RICO 12 Spearheads. To join in and help support these cool projects, please consider donating at www.rico12.com/support. or click on the link in the chat of the live meeting or the show notes of the podcast. We look forward each week and each meeting to receiving from the light reflected from our speakers. That light inspires hope, meaning, worth, and growth in each of us, the listening audience. Now I'll introduce today's guest speaker, Rhyll. Here's a little bit about Rhyll. She is a founder and vice president of SA Lifeline Foundation and a family and community advocate. SA Lifeline is a nonprofit foundation dedicated to providing hope, education, and resources related to pornography and sexual addiction recovery and the related betrayal trauma healing. Recognizing the critical importance of working 12-step for long-term healing, SA Lifeline also offers SAL 12-step recovery, a free resource for those struggling with sexual addiction and their betrayed partners. Rhyll is the author of What Can I Do About Me? Healing from the Trauma of My Husband's Pornography and Sexual Addiction. Rhyll graduated from Brigham Young University at the relatively young age of 58, where she earned a bachelor's of science degree in family life. Stephen, her husband, and Rhyll have been married for 50 years and are grateful to be working their recovery one day at a time. They are the parents of 7 children and 29 grandchildren. Take it away, Rhyll. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Justin. That doesn't tell anything about my story, and so that's except that we work recovery. So I'm sure that I need to back it up a little bit. But the first thing the first prayer that you gave, the set aside prayer, was such a good reminder to me of something I totally believe. And as I've worked recovery and as I've gotten older, I know that I don't know. And I'm recognizing that God does. And the God of my understanding knows what I need and how things are to work out. And recovery has been a great blessing in my life in that way. I don't have to know. So first of all, 50 years of marriage. Yeah, that's pretty amazing for anybody, and especially for us, because we have been through the first 32 years of our marriage was up and down. After 13 years of marriage and 5 children at that point, my husband came forward with we didn't know it was an addiction. This was in the 80s, and told me about his sexual behavior as a child, as a young adult, and that he was frequenting strip clubs and prostitutes, and he was afraid he had an STD. I did not know what to do with that information. Um, as I look back now, I recognized I was in shock. And then I just did what I knew I had to do, which was go home and take care of the kids and take care of him. He was really sad about that. I can see some of my codependent behavior showing up there. I've got to do more, fix this, take care of him. And so 10 years later, we went on without help. He was saying, this is fine, I'm okay now. Few consequences, but not many. 10 years later, he comes forward again. Again, he thinks he has an STD, and that has brought him forward. And he was able to be sober for 3 years, he told me. But he would go back, something would slide him back into the addiction. So at that point, I went into total fix-it mode. And that is codependent behavior as well. But I'm going to talk about the difference between codependent behavior and betrayal trauma. And so I found a book, I found the author, I called everywhere, and I said, we need to talk to this author. And we did, after he heard our story, even though he had no time for us. He was a therapist. We went to therapy for a year. My husband went to 4 SA meetings and said, that's not me. And I went, okay, I don't know what else to say. And after that, he said he was fine. That was the kind of help that we got. Our therapist basically said, stop thinking about it. And I just knew that there had to be more, but where else was I going to find the help? Then 8 years later, he got arrested. But he couldn't tell anybody because of his shame. And so, but 2 weeks after his arrest in a different city, he had gotten off. 2 weeks after, he couldn't live with himself. And so he came forward for the 3rd time. And this is 32 years into marriage. And at that time, we talk about surrender in 12-step. It is so critical and crucial for me. On the front lawn of our home, that Sunday morning, I raised my hands to heaven and said, take him. I can't do this anymore. And that was my first major surrender moment. And then I was able to really let go, let God, even though I didn't have good recovery. I mean, I had some. I don't know, I can't say that I didn't have any, but I hadn't done any work, really. And at that point, my husband found a good therapist. He started immediately going to SA meetings, and he went every week, 100-mile trip, round trip. And so I just thought, I'm just going to stand back and watch and see if he does anything, if it changes. Our therapist said, could you stay with him if he's in recovery? I said, I have no idea what that looks like. And he's a masterful liar. And so what would I know? How would I know if he has recovery? And I didn't even know the terms sobriety versus recovery. But our therapist said to me something that he told me later that God told him to tell me. And he said, you will know. And I thought, I don't know what that means, but I'm going to check. I'm going to take this one day at a time. And I'm going to be, at that time, we had 7 children and 5 of them were married. And I needed to be the mom of our twin boys who were teenagers. And I thought, I'll just take this one day at a time and we'll see what happens. And my husband moved out to the camper, and which was great for both of us to give us space. And he really started working recovery. But I didn't know if that would last. So going back to, and then several years into that, one of the therapists said, are you aware that you have more betrayal trauma than most women? And I did not know what that meant. I had heard codependency, but for some reason that did not fit for me. It was, I have codependent behaviors, but I was not trying to protect him, which is there's codependency and there's betrayal trauma. So betrayal trauma occurs when someone we depend on for survival or we are significantly attached to violates our trust in a critical way. And I had that. My husband had violated my trust in a critical way. And the reason that it's different than trauma is that there's a close relationship that is deeply personalized. And there's a high risk of reoccurrence. That had happened in my life for 32 years. And so understanding the difference between codependence and betrayal trauma was really important for me to begin with. And as our therapist said, I had a betrayal trauma attack several years into recovery. And our therapist, we went back for a checkup, and I was devastated. And not because of Stephen sexually acting out, but something that had happened inside of me. And we went back, and our therapist said, your trauma, your betrayal trauma is cellular. It's in your body. And the key is to learn how to deal with it. That is rough to hear, but it is true. And so as I've worked recovery for my husband is 17 and a half years sober, working recovery, but I can't say that my sobriety, if we want to call it that, is 17 and a half years. And we'll get back to that. So that's betrayal trauma. So next I had to figure out, how can I keep myself safe when this close relationship, do I want to stay in the relationship, first of all? And if he's in recovery, I determined that whatever that looked like, I thought I could. And but also there was a high risk of reoccurrence because of the addiction. And I needed to be able to do something to keep myself safe. And that meant I needed to learn how to set healthy boundaries. So boundaries help me determine what I'm comfortable with and how I would like to be treated. And it helps me to be safe. So there are physical, sexual, emotional, spiritual or religious, financial, time, and non-negotiable boundaries. There are 7 different types of boundaries. And I've learned what the addict and my husband walks like, talks like, thinks like. I can't see what he actually is thinking, but I can feel it. And because I've worked recovery and I'm working recovery, I have not ended my recovery. I will be doing this until I'm safely dead, whatever that looks like. My group knows I'll be there until they might have to come to my house if I can't walk anymore when I'm 90. But I will work recovery because the benefits and the blessings and the gifts are so great. So I think this is an interesting quote. Boundaries create emotional health and are created by people with emotional health. Now, when we are in trauma, when we have this first betrayal trauma recognition, and everything feels like it's fallen apart. Some of the symptoms are anxiety, depression, highly irregular, difficulty regulating intense emotions. Some women will be so angry and they're throwing things, and then the next day they're like, "Oh, I'm so sorry," and it's up and down. That's part of betrayal trauma, and so. Initially, it is really hard to set healthy boundaries because I'm not really healthy. And certainly the addict has a really hard time if he's acting out and not even sober, he cannot set healthy boundaries. And so I love this. They're created by people with emotional health. And so getting to that place of how do I get emotional health is really important for me. So going to the different kinds of boundaries and this is what I do. When I am feeling unsafe, and because I've never had one bit of proof that my husband acts out, not one bit of proof. This addiction is so subtle that I have to hold my boundaries around behaviors like victim, blame, resentment. Resentment's a big one. Hiding, lying. Those are just some of the few behaviors I got to see. And so when I think about what our therapist said 17 and a half years ago, you will know. Well, I began to know how the addict in my husband acts. And the second thing is I trust my gut, or I trust my instincts, or I trust the God of my understanding that says something's off. You might not know, but you don't have to know. You can set a boundary around this behavior. But I have to do it correctly in order to be able to do it in a healthy way. And so a boundary is really freedom to take better care of myself. It is not control. It is not manipulation. It's not trying to make somebody else do something that I want them to do. It is really about to create the space to attend to our own emotions and reactions. And so then we can respond with God at our center. So how do I do that if I am not very healthy in the first place? It's a good thing I have a great sponsor and that hopefully I can be a good sponsor to help other women not react, but respond. And we do this in a process called On My Knees, on the Phone, in the Box, the surrender process. But there's a paragraph in our SAL book we read every week in our meeting. Whenever I lose serenity, I pause, breathe, practice self-care, express our needs and emotions, reach to another woman who is working recovery, and write and pray to God through the surrender process. Then hold healthy boundaries based on my need for safety, and then surrender the outcome. So as I do that, detaching is one of the ways that I hold a boundary for myself for safety. Again, that it's the freedom to take better care of myself. And boundaries are the limits of love in every relationship. So detaching with love, in sexual addiction, we have a tendency to use love as a romantic word. And so it's difficult to say detaching with love. So I've started saying detach with compassion or empathy. And that compassion and empathy is for myself first and love of God. So in order to have God at my center so I can really set a healthy boundary, I need to do that pause, breathe, write it, speak it, and pray it. And then I can have confidence that my effort has God, the God of my understanding, at the center. And so detaching with love helps you become more grounded and secure in your own thoughts and emotions. You can view situations from a place of clarity than a place of franticness and worry. And so many of us, when we're dealing with an addiction or with anything that's taking us out of our center, we're worried, we're obsessing, we're telling ourselves a story. And I need God at my center in order to know, how do I find serenity here? No matter what's going on around me, the chaos, the lies, whatever, how do I find serenity? And so detaching with love looks like, for me, I love God first. And I'm going to listen to that voice. I'm going to listen to his direction. I'm not going to listen to the voice out on the side that says, but you don't trust me. I'm doing my best. It's like, okay, whatever. But I'm going to go to God with this, and I'm going to pray it, and I'm going to write it out. I don't even have to do it in a journal. I literally pull out a scrap of paper and peel off a piece and write, I surrender to God that I cannot control my husband or anything that's taking me out of serenity. And then I pray it, and I call my sponsor, and I even leave a message. I don't text and I don't email, because my brain needs to hear my voice say what I'm doing. I need to be accountable. My sponsor can be and is my accountability partner, that when I'm doing this, but really it's between me and God. And so, and I love it when she has some input, but she doesn't have to pick up, because she has her own boundaries, right? She's not going to pick up at 3 a.m. But I can still call and leave that message, because I'm surrendering to God, not to her. So detaching with love for me is when I am feeling like I've lost my serenity. I have learned to take a break. I have learned to take a drive, or to take a walk, or one time I went to dinner by myself. That was amazing. It was like, how do I walk into a restaurant and eat by myself? It was weird, but it was so freeing, because it was this feeling of, I don't have to expect somebody else to take care of me. I'm dealing with my own emotions, and I need space and time, and it doesn't have to be a long time, and it probably shouldn't. It's not like you're going to be gone forever. It's just I'm detaching so that I can feel safe, and with God at my center, because He's going to direct me back into a safe relationship, or maybe it's not safe for a while, and it's a good thing to detach for a little longer. My husband and I, if we are off, and thankfully, after 17 and a half years of work in recovery, this happens fewer and fewer times, less and less. But we will sleep separately, because we need to take some space, detach, not disconnect, which is a negative. There's the disconnect, like, I'm out of here, you're out of here, that negative. But detaching with love is really what I say, God at my center. And it's not the romantic love, like I've got to take care of him or have sex with him in order to make things feel better. That's not detaching with love in my experience. But it is critical. So we can sleep separate, or we just take a time out, and so that I can get peace and serenity in all situations, And I've done this, almost weekly, or several times weekly, with situations with my children, or worries about certain things that I can feel that I've lost my serenity. I'm anxious, I'm worried, I'm fearful. Fear is when I did step 4, fear is my top problem, my top issue. And but I have plenty of positive ones too, right? And that's what I love about steps 4 through 7. We have negatives and we have positives, but boundaries have, then this is the last thing. So many of us do not understand how boundaries are loving. And when I wrote, What Can I Do About Me?, the chapter was called Boundaries, the Most Loving Thing I Can Do. Not only for myself, but for somebody else. And some of the benefits are that my loved ones are making decisions on their own, and they're learning from their mistakes, and they're problem solving, and they're developing their own sense of self. And I'm learning how to truly love someone and how to release control. As the oldest of 9 and the mother of 7, I thought I had to control everything. And I could manage things. I don't like the word control, but I could take care of things, right? But I'm learning I don't have to do that. And it's there's more peace of mind. So that's a little bit of what I've learned. Boundaries have an if, then. If this happens, then this must happen. And it's not to control you. It's for the then is for me. If you do this, if you act out with another woman, then this is what I must do. And I learned how to do that with that process of God at my center.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Rhyll. I'm grateful for your share, grateful for your experience, strength, and hope. We've got a few questions that have come in, and I'm sure several more will come in. A reminder to our live audience, if you have a question for Rhyll, please type it in the Q&A link at the bottom of your window. Looks like 2 speech bubbles over the top of each other, and we'll get to those. I've also written a few questions here. And this first question that's come in, I'm going to combine it with one that I had written down about codependency. I wanted to ask, hey, tell me a little bit about the difference between codependency and the what it looks like to be a betrayed spouse. And what this anonymous attendee says and asks is, thank you for this amazing share. I really need to hear this. As a chronic codependent, boundaries have always been a miss for me, and I know this is going to be the crucial thing to my recovery. Has program helped you identify these boundaries, and has God given you these answers as to which boundaries you need?
Program has helped me, but so many women will text me or call me and say, "What are your boundaries?" You know, they really want to take my boundaries and make them work. And you know, I really have to work at putting God at my center, and then He's going to say, so you know that list of boundaries that I talked about. There are 7 different ones. Non-negotiable was the last one. For me, it's non-negotiable. The boundary is that my husband does not act out with other women. That's a non-negotiable boundary for me. And so if he does, then we are separated for a time, if not maybe totally divorced. After 50 years of marriage, we've got tools. I have tools, and so does he. And so that is a boundary that is we both understand. Some of the other ones, we have really worked at understanding sexual boundaries and helping each other to say, if we're not connected emotionally, we're not going to be intimate sexually, because too many times both of us use sex to just try to connect instead of being emotionally connected first and then enjoying that experience together. So I don't know, did I answer that at all? It's really hard for us as women. I was going to say, program. A good sponsor should help you be able to, when you have done this sounds weird, when you've done the work with God, and you've gone to Him and you've prayed it and you've surrendered it and you've written it down, and then you go to your sponsor and say, this is what happened. And I probably say these words more than anything. Well, I don't know. When I hear a sponsor, and then I'll say, what's your boundary for that? And she's like, I don't have one. Then you are going to continually feel unsafe. So you go back to God with this question after you've prayed it, spoken it, written it down, and ask, what's the boundary? And so many times my sponsor has been able to say, to help me to see that there are options. One woman said her husband was coming back from a trip and he was just mean and resentful. And she said, I just don't want to be there and fix dinner for him. And I said, why? Then why? Do you have to fix dinner for him? Well, yeah, no. And I said, take your teenage son and go have pizza. Your husband's an adult. He can take care of it. And that, in that way, she could detach from her feeling resentment. That's what I need to do, is detach from that negativity that causes me to feel resentment, because that is not the place I want to live.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. Thank you for talking through that. And these boundaries, a question that I have on that is boundaries. Boundaries are created, you said, are created by someone who's emotionally healthy and created to create emotional health. But boundaries so often to someone who is feeling that the boundaries are going against them often feels like, hey, this is a punishment, and you're punishing me for things that, yeah, I've done. But how is that then portrayed in a way that the consequences of a boundary violation are understood and maybe even not accepted? Because if the person's not healthy, they're still going to be angry about it. But how is that communicated in a way that can be clear and understood?
My experience is that when I do my work with God, knees, phone, box, I pause enough and I get enough serenity. Instead of being reactive, I'm responsive, and I can be direct, do no harm. But harm and offense is taken more than it's given. And the addict brain takes everything as offense. And when my husband wasn't in a healthy place, he would say, "You're judging me." Like, I'll check on that. And if I'm talking with my sponsor and I'm working it through with God and her, then I can have some confidence that, well, the addict brain is going to say, I'm being judged, I'm being persecuted. And if I'm doing my work first, not reacting, but doing that pause response situation, I really have to say it's not my stuff to take care of his stuff. If he's feeling resentful or feeling judged, I can say, I am feeling unsafe with this behavior. I'm feeling unsafe with the resentment that I feel is coming towards me. And because I feel unsafe, I have a boundary that because I feel unsafe, I must detach. And I care about you, or sometimes we can't even say that in that moment, but I'm going to detach so that I can get myself more clear.
Thank you for that. And we've got a lot of questions that are coming in rapid fire now. So we're going to get through these, as many of these as we can here. First one is from another anonymous attendee. They say, I believe that I'm addicted to fear and toxic shame. What has been most helpful to you in overcoming these?
My 12-step work. Totally. I mean, when I was doing 4, as I said, 4 was at the top, or fear was at the top of the list. And then I wrote about all the things that I feared, and how control was part of my fear, or managing things. Being uber responsible was one of my defects. It's like, what? But that's a good thing. No, it can be be taken too far, where I've got to manage things and tell people what to do and expect huge things out of people. When we have an event at our home, I recognize that I have to have a boundary with myself that says, slow down. It doesn't matter what everybody else thinks when they come to your home. And don't expect everybody to just come when you snap. And my impatience comes from my fear that I may fail, or that someone might think that I'm not good enough. And so fear, I think, is the top. And as I've worked and continue to work through, I mean, I was at my SAL 12-step meeting yesterday morning, and it was like, oh, step 1 again. For how many times in 14 years I've had, this is so good. And something new speaks to me. And I think, okay, my life has been, 14 years ago when I started with S and On, And then we went to SAL about 9 years ago. When I started doing that, I did not see my life as unmanageable. Now there's a bunch in denial there. We started some meetings so that other women could get some help. That's so weird. I mean, how much pride is there? Fear and pride at the top of my list. And so understanding that working the program consistently with a good sponsor, surrendering the things I cannot change, and changing things I can, which is me.
Thank you so much, Rhyll. Got another question from our audience. This person says, I discovered my husband has a sexual addiction with prostitutes. I reacted very badly. What's the difference between betrayal trauma and trauma bond? And I haven't seen him in 3 months and am terrified of giving him another chance.
Honestly, I don't know very much about trauma bond. I've heard that term, but I do know a lot about betrayal trauma. So my husband and prostitutes too. Hopefully he's doing some work. If he's doing, I know it sounds hard, but if he's doing the work like he wants to breathe, he'll get better. But if he's just going to an occasional meeting and saying, I'm good, you can't trust that. And so, but what I have found, when I do my work, I have a lot more confidence that God's going to direct me. My trauma brain, betrayal trauma, actually, this is not very scientific, but it makes rivets in my brain with fear, and the trauma is deep. And so when I'm doing my work, I will know when I'm safe. And if he comes back, and then a month later, he has behaviors that are not safe, you have another boundary. I always have choice. And that's one of the things as we've had betrayal trauma, so many of us, and I know for me, I didn't think I had choice. Now I just see choice at every opportunity. And actually my sponsor can really help me with that. It's like, what's the possible choice you have? Oh, I could take my son for pizza instead of resenting my husband while I'm fixing dinner for him. That's a choice, huh? Never thought.
Well, great example. Love that. All right. Another question from an anonymous attendee. We got several more questions here we'll get to. This person says, I'm an addict and act out in sex and love. I have caused my wife significant harm, and I feel she may be codependent or have betrayal trauma. I want to go to therapy to help out our 10-year marriage, but she point blank refuses and won't try to help herself or us together. I don't want to end our marriage, but I am nearly 2 years sober and growing and healing, and it feels like we are growing apart. What can I do to help her see that it may be the end of our marriage unless something changes?
That's a hard one. And it goes on both sides because, but the more you work your recovery, that whether you're the addict or whether you're the betrayed spouse, the more you work recovery, the more light you will get. And there will be, I heard Harvey last week say something about the light behind their eyes. It's like, yeah. And you will see light. And your wife, if she chooses light, will see it. And so you keep working your recovery, doing everything it takes. You go to a meeting, you call your sponsor, you're accountable. You never lie. You're 100% honest. And all of the things that are required, we say it's in the recovery puzzle. And 12-step work, consistent 12-step work is critical for long-term recovery. And we have found that out in our 50 years of marriage. Neither of us are going to leave this, because just because there's sobriety doesn't mean, I love the part in Roy Kay's story, how he was sober for many years and yet he wasn't in recovery. Stephen read that to me over breakfast in the Denver cafe. And I was in tears listening to it, because what Roy Kay said was, my relationship got worse even though he was sober. And his recovery work made all the difference. So Stephen, every night we check in, and he checks in around lust, anger, and resentment. And those things, if he has had any of those, then he talks about those, because anger and resentment are part of the addict mode, addict brain. And so I really believe that light attracts light. And unfortunately, we can't control whether another person is going to stay in the relationship. I can't even control that today with my husband. What if he just threw it all out and stopped doing everything? And, then I'll be moving on, because the more light I get, the more God is with me, and I will be okay. And I've said this to so many women, and I'll say it to the man, this person who asked the question. It's sad, but it's not awful, because the more light you have, the more that God is with you, the better your life will be. And we can't control whether somebody else comes along. That's hard, but it's not awful, as long as I keep working my recovery. See, Stephen went to 4 years of SA before I even went to any S&O. And we had therapy, but therapy was okay, but it wasn't enough. It wasn't enough for both of us to get really good recovery long term. If I had not been working recovery and he had been, I think we'd be divorced today, because I would live my life in fear. When is the next shoe going to drop? Oh no. And I wouldn't have any tools. And so I would just say, I'm out. Even though he, with good sobriety and recovery, my fear would cause me to say, done. I can't live with fear. And that's where good recovery work. And we've had good therapy and long-term 12-step and education about what addiction and betrayal trauma is all about, and learning how to set boundaries. Those things are critical, but you have to have the willing heart. And if your wife or your husband doesn't have a willing heart, you cannot manufacture that. But if God tells you to stay in for a while, like he did with me 17 and a half years ago, he knew what he was doing. And I just did one day at a time. And sometimes I was just doing 10 minutes at a time. Like, really? Really? And he was like, just hang in there with me. This is God, God, the God of my understanding, saying, okay, just one day. Okay, we'll see how it goes.
Love it. Good stuff. Good stuff, Rhyll. All right. Next question is from Harvey. Harvey asks, when someone starts in program, as you say, and she's not healthy or he's not healthy, so does the sponsor help them create boundaries? And if so, aren't those the sponsor's boundaries? As a freshly betrayed wife, her fears might see her going to boundaries that may seem unreasonable. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's why you have to do your own work. But you can hear what your sponsor, you can hear suggestions, but take it or leave it is my attitude. I carry the message, not the person. And really, my job as a sponsor is to send them back to the God of their understanding for the healthy boundaries that are needed. And so my boundaries cannot be the next girl's boundaries. They may end up being but probably not. For us, sleeping separate has worked out well because we like to be together. But in his addiction, I didn't like him. And so, but in recovery, he is a great man. He is a great man. And I really love that. I not just love it, I like it. And, but it takes time, and boundaries can change, and they often will. But nobody can tell me exactly what to do But the process is pretty cut and dried from my experience. Pause, breathe, surrender by the knees phone box, and then ask for the boundaries. But a sponsor can just say, what is your boundary and what choices do you have? And oftentimes when I say that to a woman, she'll start to think outside the box. And she'll like, well, maybe, and I'll go with that. Whatever that first thought was, after you have done this process, go with that. Because listen to God tell you, this is an option. Here's your choice.
Thank you, Rhyll. This next question is one that I have been very interested in recently, and I'm going to read this. What can one do if addiction is not an option? I am not going to act out no matter what, but suicidal thinking is popping up, and I want to expound on this just a little bit before turning it over to you. I've spoken with a lot of people on this program and other places who were 15 years, 20 years sober from their addiction and were out of their minds insane, thinking suicide is the only option. And they learned about untreated alcoholism, untreated addiction, whatever, that they were sober, but they were still stark raving mad. So tell us a little bit about your thoughts on that.
Suicidal ideation is so tricky. And I've worked with several women whose husbands have threatened that. Most of the time, well, first of all, they need a really, really good therapist. And they need to be seeing that therapist frequently. So qualified therapy is really critical in this. And then when a woman's working her recovery with God at her center, she's going to know if this is a manipulation or if this is really true. Often suicidal ideations, sometimes, I'll just say sometimes, suicide ideation is a manipulation to get their spouse or their parent or somebody else to not hold boundaries. I spoke with a really, a man that we know to be a really qualified therapist. And this doesn't really have to do with suicide ideation, but about mental health, mental illness. People are diagnosed with this, and this. There's so many different diagnoses that addicts can have besides their addiction. And their wives were telling me, I was sponsoring them, 2 different women. Their wives were telling them that their spouse, their husbands, were coming home from their therapy with this therapist saying, you can't hold boundaries with me. This doctor has told me that you can't hold boundaries with me. And so their wives are like, oh, no, I can't hold boundaries. That means I can never feel safe with this man, right? And so I asked this doctor in the hallway at a conference, and I said, this is what I'm being told by these women. Their husbands are saying. He goes, oh, no, that's not what I say. Actually, I say, because of your mental health diagnosis, you have to have better boundaries, but they're harder to hold. And I thought that was really, really important for me to understand and these women to understand that they're more critical, but they are more difficult with someone who is going to throw that mental health thing in your face and like, but you can't do this. You can't say this to me because I'm this way. And I think that goes with, so again, as I'm working my recovery and I'm really striving to have that peace and serenity that comes with God at my center, I will know whether this is a manipulation or something that he needs to be in the hospital for or have medication for and have a really qualified therapist. But that's not up to me. But manipulation is definitely one of the behaviors that the addict brain uses to get out of having to be accountable and having boundaries.
Thank you so much. And we've got more questions and then we're going to have time to get to, but I'm going to try and get 2 more questions in before we go into the wind up here. Next question is from Irving. Irving says, thank you for your insights. What does it look like to re-engage after a boundary break once you have taken your time to disengage with compassion? So what does that look like to re-engage?
That looks a little scary, and that's okay. To re-engage, maybe just one step at a time, not jump into bed together. How's that? To re-engage after boundaries been broken will require some time and some effort on both sides. He will have worked with his sponsor, and he will have done his work to get himself humble, honest, and accountable. And she can feel that. And then she will have worked with her sponsor and then say, and I'm all about re-engaging. But it requires both working recovery, because I don't want to be enabling a life-crippling addiction by just saying, oh, it's all good. And forgiveness and trust are very, very different. And so forgiveness is between me and God, but trust is, if trust has been broken, and when a boundary is broken, that is trust has been broken. And so it requires effort to be humble, honest, and accountable, totally truthful. Besides doing those attitudes are the attitudes of recovery. And when she feels that, then at some point she will feel safe to re-engage.
Thanks, Rhyll. Next question here is, this is from an anonymous attendee. I'm doing the work of recovery, but I have struggled to stay sober from porn and masturbation. After 3 years of trying, my wife wants a divorce. She's tried to get help, but she said she just can't take it anymore. I feel like she just wants a restart before getting trapped. I want to do all I can to show I still love her and am safe to be with without going into codependent tendency. What do you think I can do at this point? How would you respond?
Sobriety is step 0. And for us, for me, and our marriage, sobriety is no porn and masturbation. And it may be different for different people, and I understand that. But for most women, porn is a betrayal. And so if there's not sobriety, there's not any recovery. And that's really critical for me and the women that I work with. I need sobriety, but I need those humble, honest, and accountable behaviors, not the victim. Poor me, you don't understand how hard this is. There are tools, and being accountable. Yes, and there will be times, certainly, that there can be lapses, but relapse requires dishonesty. And so if there's a trigger and you're honest about it, and you're working with a qualified therapist and with a good sponsor, you can have not only sobriety, but be working recovery. Everyone can. I totally believe that everyone has the ability. It takes that willing heart, and it takes that attitude of, I'm going to do whatever it takes. And it can take time. And if the wife's done, it's sad, but it doesn't have to be awful for him if he works recovery. And hopefully she'll work recovery, because any woman who has been in a relationship with a sex addict needs recovery from betrayal trauma. Every woman. Otherwise, we live our lives in fear and resentment and in anger. And maybe that anger is really, really deep, and it just doesn't even come out. But it just paralyzes us. In one of our statements in our readings weekly, it says, I may have been victimized, but I choose not to be paralyzed as a victim. And the reason I can choose to not be paralyzed is my recovery work.
Thank you so much, Rhyll. We have several more questions. And what I'm going to do, because we're out of time, unfortunately, what I'm going to do is I'll post all these questions in our WhatsApp group. Rhyll, if you would like to join the WhatsApp group and answer those questions there, you're welcome to. If you're not able to do that, we understand. But we're going to post those questions in the WhatsApp group and get some conversation going on that. If anybody in here is not in the WhatsApp group, send an email to RECO12pod, RECO12pod @gmail.com. I'll get you the link to get in that group and we can discuss those questions. So I'm going to go into the closing reading now. Actually, Rhyll, do you have any last minute, like 30 seconds words of wisdom for us before I go into that closing reading?
It is so worth it. I couldn't believe that we made it to 50 years of marriage, just making it, but to feel the joy and we talk about recovering individuals healing families. We have a large family, 42 of us, and there is so much joy and peace and serenity in recovery. Do I have it totally every day? No. Actually, I called my sponsor a week ago with some major surrenders, but I can have it as soon as I surrender. And if I don't get it, then I'll surrender again an hour later. It works when I work it. And that it truly is there. The feeling of gratitude is so deep for me as I have been blessed. I didn't ever want this kind of thing in my life, but the things that it has taught me and strengthened me have just been so deep and such a gift to me and to our relationship. So it works when I work it, and you are worth it.
Love it. Thank you so much, Rhyll. That was a great RECO 12 speaker meeting podcast. If we didn't get to your question, I've already talked about this. We're going to put those questions in the WhatsApp community. If you have others, join in there and we'll answer those questions. If you're inspired and want to share something of your insights in the 12-step type share, please go to RECO 12 Shares SpeakPipe link that I've put in the chat, and it will be in the show notes. Record a 2 to 4 minute share there. If you've not yet rated and reviewed the podcast in Apple Podcasts, please go do so now. It's a great way to work to step 12 in sharing this message with others. I invite the audience to come back next week, and we'll be holding this meeting on Wednesday morning at 10 a.m. Eastern time next week, because I'll be on a plane at the normal meeting time, and the person is gratefully willing to make an adjustment so we can still hold our meeting next week. So we'll record on Wednesday morning. I'll post the podcast on Friday next week at the normal time, so you can listen then if Wednesday morning doesn't work for you. Our speaker next week will be Karen A., who is another first-time RECO 12 speaker. Her topic will be the Big Book and recovering from people and relationship addictions. I think that'll be a good follow-up here. I look forward to this one too. It'll be good. Now let's launch off into the rest of our day with the prayer of St. Francis that Rhyll will say for us.
Thank you. Lord, make me a channel of thy peace, that where there is hatred, I may bring love, that where there is wrong, I may bring the spirit of forgiveness, that where there is discord, I may bring harmony, that where there is error, I may bring truth, that where there is doubt, I may bring faith, that where there is despair, I may bring hope, that where there are shadows, I may bring light, that where there is sadness, I may bring joy. Lord, grant that I may seek rather to comfort than to be comforted, to understand than to be understood, to love than to be loved. For it is by self-forgetting that one finds, it is by forgiving that one is forgiven, it is by dying that one awakens to eternal life. Amen.
Amen. Remember, everybody, there is one who has all power. That one is God. May you find God now. Keep coming back. Let's trudge this road of happy destiny together. Work it. You are worth it.
shape of this life of mine. Peaks too high to conquer, streams too wide to cross, troughs too deep to walk through without incurring loss. Yet here I am, still standing tall, despite the rough terrain. One like me survived the storms and walked through wind and rain. Still standing, I will fight the good fight. Still searching for glimmers of light. Feet still on the ground. I can still be found standing still.
I still can fly. I may not soar unfettered. I may not rise too high.
Recorded in the book of life and bind it with the seal